All right. Okay, let's get started. So first and foremost, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for taking time on a Thursday afternoon to join us. We're very excited to have you. This is the first time, well, one of the first times that WestPeak has had a public event. And I think the goal for this is to kind of go through a couple of the misconceptions and maybe unheard of things in Finance Recruit. We're going to be going through a variety of things, and let's just get started. So first and foremost, we're going to start with a couple of introductions of ourselves, who we are, who our backgrounds and our experiences, and where we're going next. Then we're going to move into a couple of the beginning factors, being career overview and finding opportunities. So what is the buy side and sell side, which many of you might have heard of in the past, traditional routes to going into finance, and et cetera, et cetera. Then Davis will take it off with networking and his key tips for success there. And finally, Victor's going to finish us off with interview preparation and how to ace technical and qualitative interview questions, behavioral interview questions. So let's get started. So I guess to start off, who are we? Who are these three guys speaking to you over Zoom? So I'll just introduce all of us quickly. So starting with me in the middle right there, that's Piero, that's me. So I joined WestPeak as an analyst about 2.5 years ago in the 2018-2019 school year, in my first year. And I'm currently a director. My experiences have been in corporate banking, as well as mergers and acquisitions at Deloitte. And I'll be joining the Blackstone Group in London, the UK, next summer in their real estate private equity team. To the right there is Davis. Davis has been a director for WestPeak this year and was an analyst last year. His experiences range primarily, in fact, completely on the buy side, which we'll learn more about in a second. He was on wealth management at National Bank and worked at a search fund called Turtle Holdings back last summer as a private equity analyst, and will be joining CPP, the Canadian Pension Plan, in their fundamental investment team. And to my left, of course, is Victor. He's also director for WestPeak, and his experiences range primarily on the sell side. He worked at BDC alongside me, and he also worked at Momentum Cyber, boutique investment bank in San Francisco, and will be joining Moelis & Company in Los Angeles as an investment banking analyst. So together, hopefully we can bring you a broad perspective of both the buy and sell side. And yeah. So before we get started, for those of you who might not know what WestPeak is, we're not a hiking club. We don't hike peaks or anything like that. We're a capital markets group at UBC, or UBC's principal student-run capital markets club. We focus on equity research. We publish several reports a year. We have a wide range of analysts and alumni who work across the globe at several very great institutions. And we hire every school year, at the beginning of the school year, we hire junior and senior analysts. And I won't go into any more depth for what WestPeak is. You can find all of the information on our website. And obviously, you can feel free to reach out should you have any questions. Okay, so let's get started. Now, before I get started, we are going to have a Q&A at the end. If there are any pressing questions or anything material, please just type in the chat, and maybe Davis and Victor, when I'm presenting, and vice versa, when you guys are presenting, we can monitor and maybe interrupt you quickly. If not, try to hold your questions towards the end. We'll have a dedicated long period for Q&A. So write them down if you have any questions that come up. So we're going to get started with a bit of the overview. So what a career in finance looks like, what does the industry look like, and how do you approach finding opportunities? So let's start with the beginning, the raw basics. So you might have heard the buy side, the sell side. And probably not have heard this, the corporate side, but essentially there are three main components to the capital markets, to the finance world. The first being the buy side. Now, the buy side focuses primarily and almost exclusively on investing capital, and their goal is to make a return on their investment. The main two types of buy side jobs are in the public markets, being investing in what you and I would know as stocks, maybe public credit, otherwise known as bonds, and other public securities. The private markets, however, invest primarily on assets that are not publicly listed. And you might have heard of things like private equity. And you might have heard things like real estate, for example, is a private market. Those are categorized under the private markets, whereas other parts of the buy side are more complicated assets, where companies like hedge funds and venture capital firms invest in more niche sectors. And as you all probably been seeing, if you're interested in finance, the past 3 days have been very interesting for hedge funds. Those would be categorized under the other sector. So that's the buy side. In one sentence, they invest capital and their goal is to make a return on their investment. Now, however, investing capital can be a complicated process. And so the sell side exists to facilitate that process and to help investors, as well as the corporate side, which we'll learn more in a second, to facilitate the exchange of capital. Sell side are primarily and almost exclusively banks, boutique banks, bulge bracket banks, Canadian banks. There's a wide array of banks across the world, but they all primarily have three main components. An investment bank, within an investment bank, there's the investment banking division. It can be confusing at times. It focuses on different types of transactions, including mergers and acquisitions, when a company buys another company, capital raises, for example, IPOs, or debt raises, for example, issuing new bonds, and a wide array of other advisory services for their clients. Sales and trading also advises their clients, but more on day-to-day basis needs, things like trading, well, primarily trading. Let's say a hedge fund is going to sell a big portion of their stock, and they can't just sell that immediately. They hire a sales trader to make them a market, essentially help them sell their stock in the market to other market players. And finally, equity research focuses primarily on doing fundamental analysis and deep research into specific stocks. And then this research is more of a complementary service of the investment bank for their clients. So in short, the buy side invests capital, the sell side supports the buy side and corporate side on this exchange of capital. Now, one last thing I want to mention, and it usually isn't mentioned, is the corporate side. The corporate side is your regular corporations. It can be anything from tech, like Microsoft and Amazon, all the way to companies like Air Canada, Ford, Goldcorp, The Gap, all these different corporations that exist. Now, there's a lot of very interesting financial careers in the corporate side. You don't necessarily just have to work on the buy side and sell side, which makes it very, very interesting. And so I wanted to point this out because we're going to be talking about different careers that aren't also included in the corporate side. The corporate side essentially is also a player in the capital markets, and so it's important to mention them. So that's a quick overview of kind of how finance works. Now, let's say that you're a first, second, maybe a third-year student, and you're thinking about a career in finance. Now, one of the biggest, most daunting things is, where do I start? So there are a couple of traditional routes. And by traditional, I'm going to caveat by saying that most people don't follow the traditional route. However, to give you a bit of background of what it looks like, usually when you are an undergrad student, let's say you're in your first year, the key thing that really differentiates yourself once you get started is trying to find some sort of business internship in your first year. Doesn't necessarily have to be finance related strictly. The more financy, the better, of course, but finding some sort of business internship in your first year, something in an office, helps you at least get some credibility once you're applying to more internships in the future. So let's say we'll take somebody, Max. Max starts in his first year at Solder. He's able to get a business internship. Then he goes into second year motivated, but he wants to get some more hands-on experience. Usually that's when, once you're in your second year, for your second year summer, most, and we'll learn more about this in a second, but a couple of the jobs that you usually get are at smaller firms or at smaller divisions of big financial service companies. So for example, you can work at a boutique finance company, you can work at a wealth manager, research positions are very common as well. And many other people also go into big four accounting firms, which are not strictly finance. However, they carry a very strong brand name and usually they tend to hire second years. So great. Now Max has some sort of financial experience under his belt, but he wants to get something now very much, high street finance, what we call something maybe like an investment banking role or something. That's when he is well positioned to then tackle on what more, I would say, in-depth and complicated roles are, such as investment banking, sales and trading, buy-side positions, for example, big pension funds like where Davis is working at, CPP, Blackstone, where I'm working at, and obviously on the investment banking side, for example, where Victor's working at in Moelis. These are traditional, third year summer internships. And of course, once you get into your fourth year, many people aren't necessarily ready yet, so they can re-recruit, maybe take another year. Or if you are ready and you've been successful in recruiting, you can graduate and start your full-time career. Now, I don't want to go into this too much detail, but once you are done your undergrad, there's a couple paths you can take, right? If you start, let's say let's start with the sell side. Let's say 2 years into your career, you got some sort of sell side role at some sort of bank, right? Usually you'll start off as an analyst for the first 2 years of your career. An analyst job is very technical. An analyst focuses on the nitty gritty stuff, helping with financial models, helping with PowerPoint presentations, helping essentially their seniors with whatever technical needs they have. After that, you will then be promoted to an associate position, which you will spend another 2 years in. So now we're about 5 years into your career. Essentially, an associate is the middle ground between a more, I would say, client-facing role and more of a technical role. You're still doing a lot of the technical work, but most of your job is to review your analyst's work and correct it and then give it to your seniors. Many people at this point, however, change to the buy side or corporate side, a more junior position, where they decide that investment banking, notorious for long hours, they decide they want something different. They've got a lot of good experience under their belt and they want to do something different. However, if you decide to stay in an investment bank or decide to stay on the sell side, you'll then be promoted to vice president, which is a more client-facing role. At this point, of course, you can also change to another position, whether it's on the buy side or corporate side or something else, but now, of course, at a more senior role. And finally, once you're about 10 years into your career and plus, that's when you reach more very senior level, which is strictly relationship building, working with your clients, analyzing different opportunities, very strategic role. That's where managing directors, and if you get far enough, you can, obviously become an executive at some sort of sell-side company. And again, you can always change. Many people at this point potentially open their own practices or go at the corporate side at the very executive level, becoming CEOs, CFOs, that sort of. So you'll notice that there's one key thing here that is very repetitive, and that is change. In most of these careers, you can change, and it's very fluid to go from one firm to the other. So I think one of my first tips here is that you are not locked into whatever you decide to do for your first internship, right? Change is something very natural in finance. However, of course, the earlier you can start to think about what you're interested in and the more targeted you can be, the more successful you will be recruiting in those specific places. And finally, the buy side follows a very similar structure. You start as an analyst. Obviously, now you're focusing on investing rather than helping your clients. Then you will be an associate. You can change to the sell side. Again, it's not very common to go from the buy side to the sell side, but it does happen. After that, you will become usually a principal or an investor. These are different titles. You can go be called a senior analyst. It's not as structured as the sell side, but essentially you have more of a responsibility now managing a portfolio rather than just doing analysis. At this point, a lot of people will join a new team. And by a new team, I mean, let's say you're working in the buy side and you're focusing primarily on real estate and you want something different. At this point, a lot of people say, I want to try something maybe in technology, investing in technology companies, for example, right? And finally, after that, you can become a director and you have a wide ranges of things you can do to change your career. Now, I've talked a lot, but one key message remains here is that most people do not follow this traditional route, okay? If you've gone on something called Wall Street Oasis, which is a forum with a lot of different financial advice from people in the industry, you'll notice that a lot of people talk about this, but most people don't follow this traditional route. A lot of people switch and do different things. I would say only 5 or 10% of the people follow this traditional route. However, it's important to know this because these are the types of structured roles that you will probably be applying to in your undergrad. Which leads me to my next slide, which is, okay, specifically though, what type of opportunities are there if I'm in my first and second year? And we'll get to third and fourth year afterwards. The first things to note, and take notes first and second years, is that the process is applying to jobs in your first and second year is very, very unstructured, which essentially means that the job postings can come, 1 week, there can be one job posting, another week can be several job postings. A lot of firms will only add a job posting if they need new people. It's not like they hire somebody every year, with the exception of a couple of firms. So it's a bit harder to navigate. And so my key tips here is try to focus primarily on the city you're located in. The city you're located in will help you essentially, not spread yourself too thin, focus on one place. And since as a first and second year, you don't have a lot of experience, the key thing to build your resume is to focus on your extracurricular activities. By this, it can be joining clubs. Case competitions was a big thing I did when I was in my first, second year that really differentiated myself when I recruited in my third year. And of course, it is very important in finance to maintain a strong average. Grades aren't everything, but they are definitely influential in the decision-making process. And so focusing on school is very much, it's a very important thing to do. Okay. Now, specifically, what type of roles can you get if you're in your first and second year? Now, we are posting these slides in this video, and for the sake of time, we can't go through everything in detail. So you can always look up these roles and learn more about them yourself, but I'll quickly glance through them. Finance back office roles, essentially working at institutions and working on the financial side, but not really facing clients. Working in boutique finance companies like Davis did. Search funds, essentially investing in smaller companies, smaller assets. Wealth management, helping high net worth individuals managing their money. Research positions, that can include places like the Corporate Finance Institute, Canalist, places where you do a lot of research. Accounting positions, big four accounting firms, private accounting companies, smaller accounting companies like MNP. Corporate development, essentially working in a company on more of their corporate finance side. So companies in Vancouver include Goldcorp, TELUS, etc., C-SPAN that hire corporate development interns. And of course, other. Remember, if you're in your first year, you're looking primarily for a business internship. Some of these might be out of reach. In your second year, however, these should be the ones you should be targeting. Now, let's say you get one of these, you're going into your third year, right? You've got something in your resume now. What's the difference between the recruiting process in your third and fourth year versus once you're in your first and second year? Well, first of all, it's a much more structured process, right? You are now recruiting for positions that are recurring. Every year, banks and, you know, different types of financial services companies essentially recruit the same amount of interns, or relatively same number of interns every single summer. It's very structured. You can see it coming. It's very technical. These interviews, and Victor talked more about this, will be very technical. And you have to focus on learning the understanding, you know, what a discounted cash flow analysis is, understanding, you know, things that we learn in our finance courses, but also using different resources, which Victor will talk about, to prepare yourself. And finally, one of the big things here, and also important, the other one, is networking. And Davis is going to cover this in his own section, but networking for these jobs is key, because UBC is a great university. We're not the strongest in finance. We're growing, but you need to differentiate yourself. And the key there is to network. And again, Davis will talk more about this. Now, of course, we've talked about this, but you can get jobs in the sell side once in your third and fourth year, working at an investment bank, whether it's in Canada, the United States, Europe, you know, Asia. There are very strong brand names out there, but of course, you know, it's not just about the brand name. There are also boutique companies like Raymond James and Canaccord Genuity in Canada, as well as the Big Four have M&A teams where you're doing essentially investment banking work, like I did at Deloitte, but they're not strictly banks. And of course, you can work in sales and trading at all these banks. Some of them don't have trading platforms. It isn't as big of an industry as it used to be, and equity research. Now, on the buy side, there's several types of roles. You can work at a pension plan, like Davis is working at CPPIB. There's a lot of those in Canada, OTPP, PSP, OMERS, BCI. You can work in large private equity companies, like I will be at Blackstone, KKR, Carlyle, Onyx. There are big hedge funds, Point72, Polar Asset Management, and other investment funds that, you know, offer mutual funds and other types of large institutional capital, companies like Fidelity, Vanguard, and BlackRock. And for more smaller niche companies investing in startups, that is venture capital. And there's a bunch of those. Usually they're not big companies or smaller companies, but a couple of companies in Canada are OTPP, OMERS, and there's a big venture capital company called Sequoia in the world. And finally, there's other roles you can do. Again, these processes, you know, nobody follows the traditional route for the most part. And so there's jobs in corporate development, becoming an entrepreneur potentially, financial consultant, you can work in fintech, right? But these are the primary types of opportunities once you're in your third and fourth. And so to finish off, a good place to start to find opportunities is to source from different places. And so this can include job search engines. Indeed, Glassdoor, Workopolis, these are good places to start. However, they can be quite disorganized and they can be hard to find specific jobs here because they're amalgamated with every other job that's on the market, right? LinkedIn is my personal favorite. LinkedIn is a great place to find jobs because LinkedIn has a very powerful place. You can also toggle different levers on LinkedIn to get notifications on similar jobs you're looking for. For example, if you put a toggle and you say, send me an email every 2 weeks with new investment banking positions, they'll constantly keep on sending them to you. It's a good place to start. However, of course, many postings can be outdated on LinkedIn, so you got to watch out. Oops. Now, we have a business career center and we have Cool, which is Sauder's internal job board. And it's a great place for local positions that are in Vancouver. It helps you if you're a UBC student. However, there's a very limited selection of jobs and sometimes it's very hard to distinguish yourself. However, it's a good place to start specifically if you're in your first and second year. And finally, networking and company websites. These are more, you know, this isn't specifically a job search engine or anything like that, but by going on company websites, you can find postings that might not be in other places. And networking can sometimes find jobs that are not on the market, jobs that are potentially not even created yet. There have been cases of people that get jobs you know, without applying anywhere. They talk to somebody and they say, you know, we'd like to hire you as an intern if you do well enough. However, that is the exception, not the rule, but it can happen. All right, so that was an overview of the financial, sector, what types of opportunities they are, and what the traditional path is. But remember, most people don't follow that path. And you can always look back at this PowerPoint and go into this in more detail. But now I'll hand it over. Actually, before we do, some quick tips from us, and I guess I'll let everybody kind of speak. My biggest tip when kind of starting your recruit process is for third and fourth years, try to keep track of application deadlines. If you are applying to other cities, Toronto, New York, London, if you ever want to do that at some point, it can be exhausting to keep track of all the deadlines. So I had an Excel spreadsheet with all these companies I wanted to apply to, when the deadline was, so I knew I was on track for each one of them. So I'll hand it over to Victor and Davis to maybe talk about their own tips.
Thanks, Piero. Yeah, so in my end, anytime I was looking for new opportunities, especially in my first and second year when the processes aren't super structured, and even in my third year, what I would do is I would go on LinkedIn and filter for certain positions. So maybe the word intern or the word investment banking summer analyst, any sort of keywords that would indicate an internship opportunity, I would set a filter and then ask LinkedIn to notify me so that anytime one of these new postings comes up, I would know and I would want to apply right away.
Yeah, and I think my tip comes down to, wait, can everybody hear me fine, by the way?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So I think my tip really comes into finding these opportunities. For example, first and second years, when you think about, well, what's even out there for me? So what I like to do is, I'm a huge LinkedIn fiend. So I'll go on LinkedIn and I'll find people that are where I want to be. For example, if I want to do investment banking, I'll find a bunch of people that are doing investment banking from UBC, or even investment banking in general, and I'll track back on their LinkedIn to see where they worked in their first and their second year. And this is a really good tip, because chances are, if they worked at a firm who's taken a first and second year, they'll do it again. And now you already have the person in front of you on LinkedIn that you can reach out to. So that's my tip.
Awesome. So let's move on, and I'll pass it over to Davis. He's going to talk about networking.
Solid. So just as a disclaimer here, I think my sister's in the background playing piano. So if it gets loud, just let me know. I can filter the adjustment on my mic. But after looking at career opportunities and finding opportunities, let's look at, wait one second, let me turn up my mic. Okay, maybe this is a bit better. Okay, now we're looking at how do we network for these positions after we find these opportunities and look at it. So let's go to the next slide. So what is the purpose of networking? And when I speak to a lot of people, by the way, just as a caveat, these are all of my own opinions and my own experiences. It might not work for everybody. It has worked for me and a lot of other people though. So just take it all with a grain of salt. But when I talk to a lot of people and ask them, what is the purpose of networking? And people come to me and describe me situations like, if you know the first episode of Suits, when Mike walks into Harvey Specter's office and they have a little like bro down and Mike wows him with technicals and boom, there it is, Mike gets the job. It's not really how it is. Most networking conversations don't end in a 30-minute chat that says, the guy says, sign right here, here's the offer, that's it. It rarely ever happens. So I actually like to see networking as really more of building a relationship. Next slide. So really, when we build a relationship, like why are these relationships so powerful? Because it can, first of all, you can know different people that can open your eye to different perspectives. And you're honestly, give me a second here, Piero. I'm going to request remote access so I can change the screen.
Yeah, I think that's better.
Yeah, so your relationships can act like a support system for life in your career, like finding mentors or things like that. You can start relationship building early which leads to more opportunities and collaborations down the road. And finally, your chances of receiving a job offer are higher if you were referred by a current employee. Really, if we look at the industry about 5 or 10 years ago, it was always relationship driven, but it wasn't as much as it is now. Nowadays, everybody's really networking. Everybody's putting themselves in front of the people of the firm, which is why in order to differentiate yourself and really level the playing field, you have to do just about the same. Whoa, what happened there? Okay, cool. So I've identified 4 steps to networking here. The first step is cold email / reaching out. Second step is preparing for the chat. Third is having the actual chat. and next one is after the chat. So I'll touch upon every single one of these quadrants and go through it step by step, so everybody has a really good idea about what to expect. So we're going to start off with cold email and reaching out. So when you're reaching out, you have to find the right type of people, and this list isn't exhaustive at all. So this is the 4 main categories that I've outlined. First is upper year students, and you can chat with them to learn about their recruiting and internship experience. You can also ask them about different clubs to join, campus opportunities, good courses to take if you want to be in the industry. And really, for people starting off networking, this is really, really good practice. So you can get the reps in, you can rinse and repeat, and you can really get yourself well built in terms of networking for when you approach the professionals. So then there's human resources of a firm. And when you chat with human resources, it's really about trying to learn about what opportunities are there for you. You can learn about the firm's culture, and HRs could sometimes even refer you to people in the firm that they think you would be a good fit to talk to. And at some select firms, HR is most likely the person that screens your resume, that that does 1 or 2 of your interviews, and they're key to you getting an interview. So if you have the time and resources, like chatting with HR is a really good bet. Then afterwards, we can look at the analyst and the VP around there. When you chat with the analysts and associates, first you can learn about the team that they're on. So in larger finance firms like the Big Five, TD, RBC, CIBC, these analysts and associates actually usually run the first round processes, and they do the screening. So they do the interviews, they look through the resumes a lot, and they have the power to put you in the process or not. So that should be something you can keep in mind when you're looking at people to talk to. Next up is a tier of VP, director, and principal. So for a smaller firm, when there's not that big of a corporate culture, then it's a good strategy to talk to these people. But for a big firm, like the Big Five or pension funds or US large like bulge brackets, I would say that this is a very risky strategy. But as we know, with high risk comes with high return. So these are usually going to be the people that have the final saying in you getting a job, and their decision weighs more. So you can chat them, and if you do a really good job, that's awesome. But also it's very risky, because if you don't do a good job, then you can probably see where the downside comes down to. So the 3 ways that you can find the best type of people is, number 1, after a networking event, and sending them a follow-up just saying, hey, we met at that networking event. Would you be free to follow up or catch up on a call? The second one, so that's the most ideal situation. The second one's a mutual acquaintance. Maybe like your friend's friend works in the industry, or your mom, your like third cousin works in the industry or something. But it's effective because there's a middleman in between that you both know. And for example, if someone came to me and said, hey, Piero told me to come talk to you, I'd be a lot more likely to talk to him, just because, hey, Piero referred him. Like that's chill. And so that's very effective. And last but not least, let's just say you want to target a firm, you want to target an opportunity, but there isn't really anybody that you know there. That's when the good old cold email and LinkedIn comes in. And for that, you'll get a response rate about 30% or so, and you got to start this relationship from scratch. That one's by far the hardest to do, and don't get discouraged. It's kind of like just smile and dial, pick up the phone and go. And we'll talk a bit more about that later on. So now let's look at how to actually craft a message. So we looked at, what type of people you can target. Let's look at what you send to them on that first email or that first LinkedIn message. So this is a message that I've drafted to send to a mutual acquaintance. And there's a couple things you can notice that I've put here. And first thing you should notice that it's a very short message. It's not too long. They're not gonna open it and be like, man, that's like a newsletter, and just close it. It's very short and it's to the point. So, when they're in the morning scrolling through the email on their phone on their way to work, like it's super chill. Like you're like, okay, cool, done. So specific things that I have here, for example, my header says UBC student reaching out, referred by blank. So this person was a particular UBC student. So I made sure to start off at the top saying, hey, I'm also from UBC, almost like I'm kind of like screaming at them. And I also write referred by blank blank, and that's the person that helped us connect. So when they know that there was kind of like, if that's their friend and they're close with them, that email is going to jump out at them. And within the email, if we break it down here, I talk about how I know about them. I said, hey, I chatted with this guy a couple weeks ago, told me you could be a good person to chat with. And then I'd introduce who I am. So I'm a finance student at UBC Sauder. And last summer, I interned here and here, and I mainly focus on structured product sales. This summer, I'm working in private equity. My resume is attached for reference. So if you know this part, when I was at National Bank, I actually worked in a series of different things, but I noticed that this person actually had previous sales experience. So I tailored the message specifically towards them. I said, hey, I know you worked in sales. I also worked in sales. Let's connect. So really finding that middle ground where we can relate in, because now that he looks through this message, there's so many different points that would make him want to talk to me more than some random guy with like a blank template. And as I always like to say, if you can send your email template and replicate it to every single person, then that's not a good template because nothing stands out. There's nothing specifically like about them. So then I talk about, hey, you came from sales background, really setting that common ground. And then I say, here's my ask. Here's like the call to action. I'd be grateful to have 10 to 20 minutes of your time, talk about your experience, as well as more of the summer internship experience. Would you be available for a phone call? And leaving it right there. That's the ask. And that's one of the messages if it's mutual acquaintances. Here's an email from Piero, starting from scratch, like in cold email. And really, because he's starting from scratch, the email tends to be a little longer because there's more he wants to explain. And it's very much the same kind of template. He explains who he is, where his experience is, and what he wants to do. He's very interested about Morgan Stanley and their investment banking. And here's a really good part of his, because it's a common ground, right? He saw that they're a UBC alumnus, just like he is. And now here's their call to action. He wants to hop on a call, learn more about Morgan Stanley and what he should look out for. Don't worry about trying to screenshot all of this stuff. These slide decks will be posted after. So just like kind of listen to what I have to say, look at the slides, but don't be too frantic because we're going by this kind of relatively quickly. So here's a LinkedIn message reaching out. So LinkedIn, as you know, when you try to connect with someone, there's like a 300 character word limit. I totally forgot, but it's got to be way shorter than an email. So think about everything we just learned, but shrunken down, right? Hey person, blank told me you'd be a good person to chat with. Currently a student at UBC with previous experiences in this and this. I want to do this. Now I want to hear about your experiences over a call. Very short, very simple, straight to the point. And it covers mainly everything that we talked about within the emails. Okay, cool. Just looking at time. So now we're on to the second step of actually preparing for the chat. So the first part about preparing for the chat is actually identifying your goal. Like, do you want to learn about their experiences? Do you want to like learn about what clubs they're in, how they like went through school? Do you want to learn about recruiting, how that works at their firm? Or last but not least, like this is maybe like later in the game when you're becoming a little like more I guess desperate, and it's just how do I get a job at your firm? But also if you're approaching it with please hire me, how do I get a job? This is a very risky kind of ask from my personal opinion. Based on a 30-minute call, nobody's going to give you a job, or it's very unlikely. Remember, as I said, networking is really trying to build that relationship. So here's some common questions that I've always asked during a chat, and it's based on your goals, right? Whatever your goal is, you'll be handpicking specific questions from the list that fits with your goal. Because you should have one overall like holistic goal coming into the call. So nobody's ever like, what is this kid on? Like, what is he trying to ask me? Like, why is he asking me if I like want to go biking over the weekend or something? Like, make sure you go and you stick straight to the point. If you want to learn about themselves, make sure you ask the questions. So some of these questions would be like, how did you transition from X to Y? What's a culture like? How's your firm structured? What do you look for in a summer analyst? As you can tell, a lot of these questions are very broad, they're very general. You're like, what? That's your list of questions? Like, there's nothing like I can just get that off like Wall Street Oasis or something. But the purpose of these questions for me is to really start off with like a topic. For example, I asked them, hey, like why'd you transition from, Big Four accounting to finance? And he can tell me about the story. And then from what he tells me, I'll listen to what he has to say, and I'll follow up and I'm curious about this, I'll follow up. I never like in a chat, I never kind of rapid fire these questions, go one at a time. I'll pick one, and when he talks, I'll listen. For example, if I said, hey, why'd you go from, Big Four accounting to finance? You can just say, hey, maybe, I want a bit of a more fast-paced environment. I want to work like on deals and things like that. And I would say, oh, cool, no way. So like, did you find that the accounting skills you got from, let's say, KPMG really applied and was very transferable towards finance? Or how did you find that that like learning curve, right? And then they can talk about that. And I can ask like, oh, well, so like when you did that transition, what were some of the resources you used to help? Like you see how it's constant follow on and follow on. every single one of these questions can eventually turn into a conversation. And that conversation is really what you're trying to look for when you're really looking to build that relationship and build that network. Because if you're just like everybody else who asks them, hey, what do you like to do in your, like, what does your day-to-day look like? Or how do you pursue a career in finance? Like, these are very typical questions that really any kid can come on and just ask them. But building that conversation, finding that, like, just digging in deeper, building that common ground with them, that's what's really going to make you stand out in terms of how I think about it. So when we're looking at, so we have the default set of questions there, but we want to tailor these towards them and actually tailor these towards their individual profile. So where do we go about finding this information? So the things we want to look for would be their company, what their job is, work history, accomplishments, associations, common interest, deals, anything that you can really ask them about if you're curious, and also any common grounds. For example, this one time I was on someone's LinkedIn, and on the bottom, they said they went to University of Michigan and they were a varsity swimmer. So I was very sure to start off the chat saying, hey, I noticed you're actually a varsity swimmer. I'm actually a competitive swimmer myself. I was wondering, like, what was your favorite event? Was it like a 100-meter freestyle, or like, hey, did you watch like Michael Phelps 2 weeks ago? Like, starting off with that common ground. And you won't be able to know that unless you research them, right? And be able to tailor your questions to actually be able to build that common ground with them, right? Remember that key theme, being able to build the relationship. So how do we find all this information? You can find it through an basic internet Google search, through social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, their personal website, or even ask mutual friends and connections. Although I would say, if there's a number one thing, like, please don't be invasive, right? Like, this guy who's working like 10 hours a day at, like, RBC investment banking, like, he's not one, like, he doesn't want his coffee chat next week to like request him on Instagram or like add him on like Snapchat off like quick ad or something. Like, that's just super creepy. And just like, so don't be invasive. Find what you can find, but don't go into the extra effort to like just become an FBI agent and try to just really dig in. Like, hey, I learned that in like 2005, like, you tripped in a grocery store and like it was on camera. Like what was that? Like, no, like, none of that. You don't want to go into those. Make sure like it doesn't come off creepy, like not kind of like a stalker. But these are good starting sources in order to really find information. And tip here, always prepare questions beforehand. Always, always. So now comes down to actually having the chat. So here's some key tips that, so there's really the chat's always going to be different depending on who you're talking with, right? Some chats can go really well, some can go poorly. Some guy might love basketball and soccer and you might hate it and you play and you swim, you're a swimmer or something like that, right? Because every single chat is going differently, there's no rule to how the chat should be. So we're actually going to walk into individual tips from me, Piero, and Victor. So one of my tips for this is that make sure by the end of the chat, they always remember you by something unique, right? If you're an industry professional, think about it from their end. They're going to be getting tons and tons of coffee chats and messages every single day, and they might be chatting 4 to 5 people a week. So you want to leave something unique about yourself that they can remember you by. So like, it's not like a basic chat where you fire off questions at him and he just forgets you the next day. So during that chat, what I like to do is I like to say, hey, why don't I, like, before we go into the chat, why don't I introduce myself really quickly for like 30 seconds, and then we can dive into a bit more questions about you. And they'll usually say, okay, cool. So then I'll start off telling them, I said, hey, I'm like my name is Davis. How I actually got into business, really, I used to always really enjoy playing piano. So my first job was actually a wedding pianist, where I went around the Lower Mainland and I played piano at different weddings. And just doing that gig, trying to get gigs, led me to really trying to sell my skills, sell my talents, and be able to build connections. That's what actually led me to come to business in the first place. And that part right there usually says something very unique about myself, because like, I'm a wedding pianist. Like off the top of your head, name me one other person that that's a wedding pianist, and probably not many, right? So that's like a very unique point, and they'll be like, oh, no way, like you play piano at like weddings? And then I was like, yeah. And I'll expand into that. And after that chat or after that networking event or whatever, I'll just say, hey, I'm the dude who plays piano at weddings, love to connect further, or like, thank you for the chats. Now I'll pass it on to Piero or Victor to talk about their tips.
Sure, I can continue off of that. I think the one theme across all of our advice here is to be memorable, right? And so my advice for that would be try to start the conversation on something you're both familiar with. And Davis touched on that a little bit, but say you're chatting a UBC alumni, definitely start being like, hey, you know, nice to see another UBC alumni out here in Toronto or wherever that is. If you can hit it off on a great note where try not to talk business for the first few minutes of the conversation, try to like talk about something else that you guys can both connect on, then the conversation won't seem as transactional as it might seem otherwise. And then they'd really actually appreciate that you're taking a genuine interest in their interests as well.
Yes, thanks, because I don't have control of my screen, so you get to unmute me. Yeah, so and my piece of advice is very similar. It lies somewhere in between Davis's and Victor's. So, you know, Davis talked about being unique, and Victor talked about trying to find something you're both familiar with. One of the key things you do not make sure you do not do is you don't fall into the imitation trap. And what that means is find what they're interested in, try to connect, but don't try to force an interest. If they like lacrosse and you know nothing about lacrosse, don't start talking about lacrosse. You're gonna dig your own hole, right? Sometimes, and this is where Davis's point comes in, right? Being authentic can be better. Like if they say lacrosse, you're like, well, actually, I play professional frisbee or something. You at first it probably seems like maybe I should be exactly like them, but no. In fact, it's actually better if you're more unique. They're gonna find you cool, right? And that is very important. So don't fall into the imitation trap. And you can remute me, Davis, and continue.
Yeah, I totally forgot I have control over your screen, so I actually control whether or not to mute you. Okay, cool. Give me 1 second here. Okay, sweet. So now we're gone to the point where, okay, perfect. So now we've gotten to the point where we talked about how to cold email for these opportunities. We talked about how to prepare for these opportunities. We talked about actually having the chat. Now, what's more important in everything that you've done is after the chat, right? If you say having the chat and you just finish off right there, never email the person again, that's almost like it's like you that relationship isn't built. It's like going on a first date and then afterwards just not texting, just like cutting it off right there and like thinking that, you know, they're gonna like you like a couple months later when you go apply for the job. Like that never happens. A relationship is built over time, right? It's by copying on that second call, that third call. The equivalent is that, you know, that second date, that third date. And then until they get to know you more, you get to know them more, and they're comfortable referring you into the process, or they're comfortable being able to build that relationship with you. Excuse the colloquial example, but it's honestly the best way I could ever find to really, really explain that. So the true relationship takes time. So the key to networking that I think, so like what I think is the fundamental flaw of a lot of people teaching how to network is that the purpose of networking is to network. That's totally not true. The purpose of networking is to build a relationship, right? And nobody ever really teaches what to do after the chat. They always teach you how to cold email and how to do the chat. Nobody ever mentions or talks about what do you do after the chat, right? Like, do I just send them an email saying thank you for chatting with me and like goodbye? That like, which is why is specifically why we're taking a chunk of our time to actually talk about that. And when you're following up and, you know, building that relationship, think back to my kind of dating example where you want to like follow up with like have reasons to follow up. So when I'm reaching back out to professionals, I usually like to follow up with them for a number of reasons. For example, holiday emails, right? Hey, just want to say happy holidays. Hope you have a good new year. You can follow up with them for updates on your end, jobs, achievements. Maybe you want to get some more advice. Let's say like they recommended you to read a book, and you read a book. For example, I had once this coffee chat. He said, "Hey, you know, in order to know what I'm talking about, you should read these 3 books and watch this one movie." So I did that. I went home, I spent winter break, I read those 3 books, and I watched that one movie, followed up with him. I said, "Hey, that was great. Let's chat again." And he was impressed. So he hopped on another call. He's like, no kid has ever just did it exactly everything. I'm not saying you have to, but I'm saying that like it's a good way, to follow up with other people. Another way is, let's say they did something big. They got a promotion, they announced a deal, and you saw it on LinkedIn. Feel free to drop an email and congratulate them. Or maybe just following up on recruiting timelines. You chatted with them, the chat went well. Now's the time where recruiting starts, just following up and saying, hey, wonder how the process is going. And here's something to not do. Unless you're close with them, don't follow up if you have nothing to talk about. These guys got like their own friends. Some of these people have wives, significant others. Like, they don't need you to call them and say, hey, so just, like, how's it going? Like, I'm just chilling. Just want to see how you're doing. Like, how are the kids? Like, if you don't have an agenda, don't follow up. Like, really, like, don't, like, it'll be, like, unless you're close with them, of course, but otherwise, like, I almost see like kind of like just wasting your time, right? They've got their own friends to do that. So here are some examples of the follow-up emails that I've written. So first one is job accomplishments of mine. So I just said, this is sent to someone who I had a chat with, and they helped me a good amount. So I just said, hey, hope everything's healthy, because this was during COVID time. So I wanted to follow up on our last conversation in March and give you a brief update. I actually ended up landing an internship. Yay. Thank you so much for the help and the advice you gave me, especially about being able to, quote unquote, turn on a dime in this market and being flexible. Now, that is the single most important sentence of this entire email. Why? If you took this sentence out, I could have sent this follow-up email to just about really anybody in my contact list. But because I had the chat with him from the first chat, and I remembered one key piece of advice that he really stressed was like, hey, this market moves fast. You need to turn on a dime. I remember that. I wrote it down after the chat, and this was 3 months later. I slapped it right back into this email, and it just shows that like you care what their advice is. And for someone on the other end, they feel really, really good when when they see that people are actually making influence, right? And me repeating that back to him was it was huge. It was the most important sentence of this email. And then I asked him with, once again, the call to action, right? How are things on your end? Let's catch up over a quick call. So next is really the second call for more advice. So first, this is kind of like a two-part message. First, I start off with, hey, congrats on the promotion. I saw this one on LinkedIn. I just want to give you a quick update. I did my first round phone screen, national, like, thank you for introducing me to the HR. On a side note, I have a super day this Friday with this bank in New York focused on renewables. Given that you work in renewables, are there any kind of primers or things that you can send me to help me to learn more? And like, then once again, call to action. If you have time to hop on a call, like, that'd be even better. So that's really the second call for more advice. The third one is just quick and simple, promotion. I didn't really have anything to talk with him about, but honestly, I saw it on LinkedIn. I just wanted to check in. I just said, hey, want to drop by, say congratulations on the promotion. Done deal. Next one is a simple holiday one. It just says, hey, hope you want to send a quick email wishing you and family happy holidays. Thanks for so much of the help. Best of luck in the new year. This is a very classic holiday like email, but the thing is, this isn't one of my best crafted ones just because there's really nothing that's tailored towards them. It's very much just like a generic. But one thing to keep in consideration is be very sensitive and careful with the holidays, right? For example, if they're like, for example, like, be careful when you're talking about their ethnicity or like nationality, when wish them like happy Hanukkah, like Merry Christmas, or like Chinese New Year. Like, I'm not going to message Piero and just say, hey Piero, just want to say like happy Chinese New Year. Like, she's going to be like, what the heck? So just make sure what you're saying, like, be very sensitive to people's different cultures and things like that. So a very good generic bucket term would be just, hey, happy holidays. Like, if you don't want to make any assumptions or whatever, happy holidays, done. Next, like, move on. And just like, happy New Year is good too. Like, the New Year moves for everybody. It's not like some or the other. So here's a final note that I have. So we talked about the entire process, really the entire 4 processes up until following up. And I just wanted to give a couple final notes. And this is really what not to do. We talked about everything that you should do. This is what not to do. And I think this is just as important as what to do, because these are kind of lines you don't ever have to cross. A lot of these may seem obvious, but like, I don't know, you'd be surprised. So starting off, so we broken this down into the 4 steps we talked about, and there's what not to do under every single step. For example, cold email and reaching out. Like, don't misspell their name or their firm. Like, if you're drafting emails at 2 a.m. in the morning, make sure you don't like spell people's name wrong. For example, when in the beginning, when WestPeak started recruiting, me, Victor, and Piero got LinkedIn messages from a person that to ask about WestPeak. We all got an individual message. Victor's message said, "Hey Victor, really nice to meet you. I wanted to learn more about WestPeak. Can we hop on a call?" Piero's message said, "Hey Victor, really nice to meet you. Can we hop on a call?" My message said, "Hey Victor, nice to meet you. Can we hop on a call?" And it may seem like obvious where it's like don't do that, but a lot of like when you're drafting emails at 2 a.m., like people make these mistakes. So make sure you're, double checking these, triple checking these, make sure they're all right. And that goes to the second point. When you're copy pasting email templates, make sure you double check. The third team, this is just from my personal experience, right? People take these in different ways, but it's don't message every person on the team, because it's like, let's say, let me use the me, Piero, Victor example again. Let's just say Victor said, someone sent Victor and said, "Hey Victor, I want to talk about WestPeak. Can you hop on a call?" And Victor is really like, warming up, like, "Aw, like I'm special. Like someone wants to talk with me. Like this is awesome, guys." And then Piero comes up and he's like, "Oh, yo, I got the same email." And then I come up with like, "Yo, I got the same email too. Mine actually says Victor on it." But the value like goes down when you chat everybody on the team and you don't really feel special about them anymore, right? You want a specific reason to chat with someone individually. If you just go and just talk with everybody, that's not cool. Some people think of it differently, but my basic example with this would be back to the dating example. Don't date everybody in the same friend group. Very simple and easy. Everybody can understand. Also, next thing, which is also a little more subtle, is avoid reaching out on holidays and weekends. Like first of all, people don't usually check their like phones and stuff over the weekend, or especially holidays. They want to spend time with their family, with their friends. And chances are, if you email them, they're just going to look at it. They're not going to reply. They're going to forget about it and, not get back to you. So best bet is doing Monday to Friday. But generally, I would say don't email on a Monday because it's their first day back from the weekend. So they're super swamped with work. They try to get everything done and pumped out. So they're not going to, chances are they're not going to message that much. On the Friday, they're ready to get out of there. And they don't want to talk to any kids on Friday because they just want to finish their stuff, go weekend, go on a yacht or something. They don't want to talk to you mostly on the weekends. I would avoid Fridays as well. My personal kind of sweet time for emailing someone is fresh on that Tuesday morning, where it's in the beginning of the week, so they're still feeling productive, but it's after Monday, so they've got all of their stuff out of the way. Next, looking at time, I'm going to hurry up this a little bit, but preparing for the chat, don't do anything that can invade their privacy, right? Like don't add them on Instagram, Snapchat, whatever. Don't prep questions that are too personal. Like don't be like, "Hey, Piero, like I noticed like you actually have a sister who's doing this. So I was wondering if I could what's she up to? Like stay away from those." Then finally, kind of like the unspoken rule, don't ask them how much they get paid. Just don't. When you're having the chat, this might seem very obvious, but avoid controversial topics, right? Don't start off the call like, "Hey, my name's Davis. This is my political view." Try not to. Avoid using, this should be very obvious. Avoid using racial swear words. After the chat, don't spam them. Don't send them one email a week being like, "Hey, thank you for following up. Hey, message a week ago. Really, thank you for chatting with me again. Hey, thank you, blah, blah, blah." Right? Don't message them on every single holiday. Don't be like, "Hey, happy St. Patrick's Day. Hey, happy Valentine's Day. Halloween," whatever. And once again, to the previous point, be wary of their culture and religion, and try to be as broad as you can. Last but not least, unless they tell you, don't follow them on LinkedIn or add them on Snapchat or whatever. And the most golden principle here is do not lie, right? Based on what Piero said before, if you don't like lacrosse, don't say you like lacrosse, right? If that guy's from University of Toronto, don't say, "Hi, I'm Davis. I'm from University of Toronto." It never goes well for you. And if they ever find out that you lied, you can almost be sure that you will not be working at that firm again, because lying is the number one no. Never lie. So here's a final note. Networking is a huge numbers game. It can get very, very discouraging. And take it from me, I spent an entire summer cold calling. I was literally the person that nobody wants to talk to. And you will not get along with everybody, right? For example, some people are introverted, some people are extroverted. There's different personality types. You might not get along with everybody. You might hang up a call. You might have 2 weeks where every person you call, you just don't seem like you're hitting it off. But don't be discouraged, because networking is a numbers game. And at the end of the day, you cannot change your luck, but you can change your probability, right? If you message 2 people, one of them hates you, one of them like you, that's a 50% rate. But if you message 100 people, now there's 50 people who like you and 50 that are like, okay, very ordinary. But that's still 50 people who like you. And the more chats you do, the better you will get, slowly and slowly and slowly. And just to give you an example of my case here, from year 1 until now, I went back, I counted my entire spreadsheet. I started a spreadsheet since year 1. Like, I've personally reached out to more than 450 people over email, LinkedIn. And I've had chats with 179 different people. Out of the 179 chats that I've had, there are 37 people that have consistently helped me, that I catch up with regularly, like, for example, like seasonally, like the ones that I send Christmas holiday emails to, the ones that I ask for advice time and time again. There's 37 people. And these are 37 people that would be more than happy to put me into a process at their firm if there was. And out of the 37, 7 became my personal mentors, like not even in business, just in life, like in general. These became my mentors that I talk to on a week-by-week basis, or even on some on a day-by-day basis, that I can just catch up with. And these are the people that I've become friends with, really. Have them on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. We talk, and like, see, the thing is, if I talked to 10 or 20 people, that funnel would have been a lot smaller. But just because I've started early and it's a huge numbers game, you know, it just got better and it got better and it got better. And now I'm like heading into 4th year and I have like my network really set up. And with that being said, I'm going to now pass it on to Victor to talk about acing the interview.
Great, thanks, Davis. I'm actually going to share my screen real quick. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Solid. All right, let's get started. So this is the culmination of everything Davis and Piero have just talked about. You found the job you want. You know how to get there. You found the people that you wanted to speak to. You made solid connections. You got a referral. You applied, and you got that interview invite. Now it's time to perform and make all of that hard work pay off with an offer at the end of the day. So we're going to get started and talk about a few different things here with regards to interviewing, you know, various questions you can expect and how to prepare for them, among other things. So let's get started. First of all, you have to research, you know, what kind of questions will you be asked on the role that you've applied for. Like if you've applied for an investment banking role, the questions you're going to be asked there versus a venture capital role are going to be fundamentally different, and you need to know that ahead of time. Second thing is you need to know your interviewer. Generally, before your interview starts, you're going to be given a name of the person who's going to be interviewing you. And so if you can do some background research on them, you can prepare questions, and that's going to show in your interview when you arrive to the question portion of your interview. Third, practice. You need to practice interviewing, specifically mock interviews, whether that's with yourself and recording how you enunciate and how you answer questions, or with other people. And the best mock interviews are either with older students who have been through the processes, or if you've made strong connections, maybe some of the mentors that offer to help you. I know Davis, Piero, and I all have mentors who are more than happy to help prep us for interviews in advance. So those connections pay off even after you get the interview offer. And then lastly, you need to talk about yourself. What makes you authentic? You know, as Piero mentioned, we come from UBC. UBC is not super strong in finance. So if they're going to hire you, there needs to be a compelling reason why. And you could pass the technicals, but beyond that, there's something else that needs to make you stand out and make these firms take that gamble and want to hire you. So we're going to get into all of that. So this is a bit of a big slide. We'll break it down step by step, but this is a common interview structure. This is quite frankly applicable to all interviews, not specifically finance, but the questions here are tailored to finance. So we're going to start on the left-hand side. We're going to start with behavioral. Behavioral questions are questions that the interviewer asks generally at the beginning, just to get a feel for, who you are, what your personality is, whether you're going to click. There's the common saying that whether or not you get the job is decided in the first 10 minutes of your interview. That's usually because the first 10 minutes are these behavioral questions, because you can knock your experience and your technical questions out the window, but if they just don't like you for whatever reason, they won't hire you, unfortunately. These firms have the privilege to be picky, and it shows. So you get questions like, tell me about yourself, which we're going to dive more deep, because this question is 100% guaranteed at any interview you'll ever get. Why this firm? Always a great question that you should be expecting to be asked and never be caught off guard. Why this job? You might be applying to a large bank. Why specifically investment banking, sales and trading? Strengths and weaknesses are very common. Sometimes they're asked, more often than not they're asked, but having those prepared, and we're going to go through some as well. Scenario-based questions. So maybe something along the lines like, say your analyst gives you a deadline and you have other deadlines, how do you manage? So essentially walking the interviewer through your thought process of how to manage certain challenges they might actually face on the job. Another thing, especially if you're interviewing for a specific sector industry, so maybe you're doing investment banking, but you're doing technology investment banking or real estate investment banking or real estate private equity. They might ask you why real estate specifically, why tech, and you need to have a compelling reason as to why, because they want to take people who are genuinely interested in that field. Moving on to experience as situational, this is maybe them taking a look at your resume and trying to poke holes or trying to poke around to see, whether what you wrote on your resume is truly reflective of what you actually have done in real life. So tell me about your time at X. Very common question to have asked. So if you have another internship on your resume, they're probably going to ask you a few questions about it, what you do, what was your role, what were your main responsibilities. All of those are common questions that you should be prepared to answer ahead of time. Sometimes, for example, I know there's a few of you here that may not be in finance, that you might be in a completely different faculty, you might be in accounting, you might have decided to transfer into finance. So you might have some experience on your resume or your academic career that might not be finance related. So you could expect to be asked the question, you've been in, science, doing physics. Why did you decide to make the switch into finance? Why do you want to do this instead? And be prepared to give a good answer for that one, because you need to convince them that you're serious about this and that you know what you're getting yourself into. Others is like, tell me a time when you had to work under strict time deadlines. So any sort of situational question where they want to see how you respond to various scenarios, once again, that you might find yourself on the job. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I haven't gotten that question. I know other people have, and this is very much a question that can catch a lot of people off guard and make you think. And having an answer prepared for that is always a good idea. And for that one, for context, you'd probably want to say something along the lines that I'm really interested in this job. However, 5 years is a decent amount of time. And, I'm not exactly sure where I'll see myself in the future, but I would love to have the chance to work at your firm, something along those lines. And lastly, what is your biggest regret? This is a question that catches a lot of people off guard. And if you're not prepared for this question, you can fumble and it might make or break your interview. So think deeply about this one. Don't make it something incredibly personal or traumatic or something along those lines, but something that you can genuinely share with your interviewer would be great. And lastly, are the technical questions. Now, I want to preface this by, when you're getting asked technical questions, that's a baseline. If you pass your technicals, that's generally what's expected of you. You're not going to get the interview solely because you did well on your technicals. That's something that they use as a benchmark. You could even get a technical question wrong and still answer your behaviorals and situational experiential questions great and get the job. So technicals are there just for a baseline, but make sure you get them right, because it shows that you put your money where your mouth is and you're genuinely interested in the job you're interviewing for. So we've got several questions here. This list is not comprehensive, and I will show you resources where to find more interview questions and more kind of questions you can be asked for the various jobs you might be interested in. So for example, 3-statement and accounting questions are very common in investment banking interviews, private equity interviews, investing interviews, any place where you really have to look at a company's balance sheet or its capital structure, which is generally those kinds of roles. Valuation methodologies also very similar. Investment banking, private equity, investing are where these generally come up the most. Sometimes sales and trading, but not so much. Market-based questions are virtually guaranteed in sales and trading. And what I mean by market-based questions, it could be something along the lines of, what happens to bond prices when interest rates fall? That's a market-based question. Or what's been happening in markets today? Or can you tell me where the NASDAQ index is at, or where the S&P 500 is at? Or what's going on with GameStop right now? All those questions are perfectly valid, and you'll generally see them in S&T interviews. Investing, they matter as well, especially if you're working in public equities or interviewing for a public equity role. And investment banking, they're common, but not as much, just because you're somewhat disconnected from what's going on in the capital markets in real time. A case analysis is incredibly common for investing in PE. And what I mean by a case analysis is you're given an investment opportunity, or you're given a stock, and you have to analyze and pitch it, or somehow arrive at some sort of thesis. So whether that's you're given a company and you have to tell the interviewers whether or not you should buy or sell that company, or something along those lines, you should definitely prepare and expect case questions for technical interviews. Mental math is very common for investing in S&T roles. I actually had a chat today with someone who said that in her sales and trading interview, she got a question, what's 81 times 81? Which is, something that if you're not great at mental math, you should probably practice, especially for these roles. And it's something that you should definitely have up your sleeve, because there's a lot of mental math involved in some of these interviews, especially in investing in private equity, very common in sales and trading and investment banking as well. And then lastly, a stock or an asset pitch. So it's similar to a case analysis, but this time, instead of them giving you a company, they ask you, what stock should I invest in right now? Or, my fund is looking for some sort of stock, what should we buy in? Or what kind of real estate assets are you looking at or interest you? And you need to give a concrete example, and you need to back that up. And then they're going to poke holes and question your thesis. And so that's an entire, that is sometimes could be a very large chunk of the interview. And we actually have another workshop coming up for stock pitching in particular. Let's move on. So we're gonna dive a little bit deeper into the behavioral aspects of the interview, which is specifically crafting your story. So one of the questions you're absolutely guaranteed to get is, tell me about yourself. And it can seem innocent at first, but a lot of people ramble. A lot of people don't give the interviewer the information they're looking for, or they tell them too much or too little. And so there's a very structured way as to how to approach it. Tell me about yourself, how to craft your story. First of all, is you have to be unique. You really need to tell them something that they'll remember you by, because when they're sitting in that room making hiring decisions, they've interviewed a lot of candidates, and there's something, you need to plant something in their head that when they're reviewing candidates, they'll remember you and vouch for you. You need to sound natural. I know I'm someone who is very afraid of speaking off the cuff, and so I very frequently have notes, or I try to memorize my tell me about yourself. That sounds robotic. People will recognize that, and they'll know that you're reading off a script, whether that's mentally or you physically have a script in front of you if it's a phone call. Make it sound natural. Make it sound like you're just walking them through your life story. Make it sound genuine. You have to really demonstrate why you're here. What led you to this moment to talk to this person in particular. You have to show that you have the passion and the desire and the capabilities to work at this firm. And you do that by telling them about your past experiences, your past victories, what your achievements were. And lastly, authenticity. You have to show them that you're a good person. Obviously, you have to tell them about your achievements, but you can't just flex yourself the whole time. You have to be real with them. You have to be humble. You have to be hungry. You have to be someone who they can enjoy working with at the end of the day. And so, as we can see, there's 3 parts to crafting your story. You've got the present. I am Victor. I go to the Sauder School of Business, XYZ. Then you've got the spark. You've got the part where it's like, this is what got me interested in finance. And this could be anything. This could be your dad, telling you about various stocks they bought. It could be your first case competition ever. It could be your friends. Something that just, snapped in your brain. You're like, I want to pursue finance. And then after that spark, you show them your progression as to how you got to where you are today. I wanted to do finance. I joined WestPeak. I compete in stock pitch competitions. And, I decided that investment banking was for me after speaking to so many people. And so this is why I'm here talking to you, because I think you're the place where I want to be. And that makes it sound natural, and that makes it sound genuine. Right. How long should it be? Again, your tell me about yourself can be used in a variety of different situations, not just interviews. You can use your tell me about yourself in a networking situation as well. So it very much depends on the situation. So if keeping it short is a networking event, or introducing yourself to a coworker or a classmate, something very casual where you're not really trying to impress. Just let people know who you are. Slightly longer, 30 to 60 seconds, could be in an informational interview. So if you're coffee chatting someone, maybe you can make it slightly more extended because they have their full attention towards you. And then once you're finally in that interview, you want to make it between 1 and 2 minutes, because they're going to be taking this stuff down and you want to convey what you want to convey. Try to stick within these time limits, because the longer you speak for, A, the higher chance there is for you to screw up, and B, the quicker they lose interest. And you've got a certain amount of time to interview, and so you want to make it as effective as possible. All right, let's go into some other questions that you might be asked. So definitely one of them is strengths. What are your strengths? Why should I hire you? What would your friends say about you? So you should be prepared to mention 2 to 3. And but sometimes I know a friend who got asked this question, and he gave them 2 or 3, I think, strengths. And then they asked, tell me another one. And then tell me another one. Tell me another. And then until my friend just broke and just could not answer anymore. So just in case they try to grill you on this, be prepared to have at least 4 or 5. But after this, you should also be concise. You should be someone who goes into, you need to provide evidence that you have the strength. So say, I'm someone who is very diligent at what they do, or someone who is very attention to detail oriented. Show them why you are. Give them some sort of an example. And then lastly, make it look relevant. So, if you go into an interview, into a finance job, and you say, I think I'm very artistic and I like drawing, that's not a strength that is really applicable to the job you're applying for. And it will just serve to kind of weird out the interviewer, being like, why are you telling me this? Like, this doesn't really matter for this job. So make it relevant. And see, and if you can dig deeper into the job description and see what they're really looking for, and you can speak to that in your interview, that's just the cherry on top. Weaknesses. This is something that a lot of people trip up on. Weaknesses is a very tricky question. I personally don't like this question, because I know that when people answer this question, they will not tell me that their weakness is they have like some deep flaw, fundamental flaw, because you're not supposed to do that in your interview. But I digress. Mention 1, but keep 2 or 3 just in case. Think about the job, and so in opposite to what you do with the strength, in a weakness, you would give them a weakness that's not hugely relevant to the job. And when you're giving them the weakness, you have to have some sort of action. You need to be like, I have this, I'm aware of this, and here's what I'm doing to solve this problem. So that indicates self-awareness, and that indicates that you're working on fixing this weakness. And avoid cliches, and specifically avoid weaknesses that are secretly strengths. That will piss a lot of people off. So if you tell them that I work too hard, or I spend way too much time to make sure everything is great, or I stay up till 3 a.m. too much because I'm so busy, that just sounds like puffery, and it doesn't really leave a good impression on an interviewer. It kind of makes you come off as a bit of like a narcissist. So keep it genuine to a degree. not to the point where they're like, if this person has this actual fault, they won't perform well in this job, but keep it real. Yeah, that. And then we've got some situational questions. So, tell me a time about when you worked in a team setting, you failed, stand your ground. These are questions that you could always get in an interview, and there's millions of variations of these. So we can't prepare you for all of them, but you should generally prepare certain stories that speak to certain attributes that you have or experiences that you've had that will cement why they should hire you over other candidates, right? Make sure to not reuse the same experience multiple times. So, your case competition experience could be something working under time management, leadership, but don't use the same experience for multiple answers, because that's going to show them that you don't have that much experience, which is problematic. Keep it concise, don't ramble on. A lot of people can talk a lot about the background. Remember, you need to do, you need to give a bit of context, but the main kicker is to being able to show them how you responded to this situation and how that makes you a good candidate for this role. And again, you can somewhat prepare for these questions by reading through the job description and looking for what's expected of you. So if you're applying for, say, an investment banking role, it might say, what's a time where you worked under a significant time pressure? Tell us about a time when you worked in a team, because this is what you do in the role. And so they want to know if you can function well in those scenarios. All right. There's also industry-specific situational questions that you can be asked. So, for example, we talked about pitch me a stock. Tell me about a transaction we did. Tell me a joke. These are questions that you can prepare for. Like, you can prepare a pitch, you can prepare a transaction, and there's also questions that you can't prepare for, like a joke or a market sizing question. For example, how many barbershops are there in Vancouver? I know Piero got how many pizza shops are there in Manhattan. So there's a lot of different variations to these questions. And so you prepare for those by looking at similar questions in the past. Don't answer right away. Take a few moments to think about it. You can ask them, hey, could you give me a few seconds just to formulate an answer or to think? And 99.5% of the time they'll say sure, like who says no? Compose yourself and then give a proper answer. But remember, always tailor this to the job. If you're working for investment banking, or you're interviewing for investment banking, you can be pretty sure you'll be asked about a transaction your bank did. If you're interviewing for public equities, you can be pretty sure you'll be asked to pitch a stock, if not multiple stocks, and both a long and a short. If you're interviewing for a industry-specific group, you will probably be asked what kind of trends are there in this industry, and you need to be able to speak to that. And so, again, you can easily pass these questions and impress your interviewers by doing your research beforehand. It's that simple. Like, I swear to God, if more people did their research before coming into interviews, there will be a much higher success rate, because you're going to know most of the questions in advance. All right, now you've been there for 30 minutes or an hour, or if it's a super day, you've been grilled for 3 hours straight, you're mentally cooked and you just want to go home and sleep or cry or both. So ending the interview, that's honestly a very important part. Obviously, you've got the whole interview and you might have performed well, but the end, that's where you want to make your name heard. And that's when, because right after they're going to go and discuss you, you want to leave a good impression. So when they ask, do you have any questions for us? Which, by the way, will always happen. Always, 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 always. Be prepared with questions. Do your research beforehand. Ask them about themselves. Do some research on the company. It's like, oh, I saw you did a transaction here. Like, what are some other interesting things going on in the industry that you've been seeing? Maybe talk to them about their experiences and their role. Or another great question is introspective questions. What advice would you give yourself if you were in my shoes, for example, in university? What are some advice you'd give to a university student, such as, me? Things that make them think, that spark a conversation, that makes them show that you're genuinely interested, not in just the firm, but in them, and that you enjoyed this interview. It would be really important to end your interview off on a strong note. after you've interviewed, this is something I struggle with. Remember the names of your interviewers, whether that was in an email or if you have to remember that when you walk into the room, because you're going to need to craft a thank you email to them. You're probably going to have their email by this point, or if not, you can guess it based on the corporate email that was used to invite you to the interview. If all else fails, you can send them a LinkedIn message too. Talk about the interview, something you wanted to emphasize or something that you guys talked about in the interview that you wanted to hammer on again. Thank them for your interest, thank them for the opportunity, and make sure to give a personalized response to everyone who's interviewed you, because if they see that they each got the same email, they will probably thank you, because that's not respectful. The email is something that won't get you the job if you send it, but it will lose you the job if you don't. So it's like a zero-sum game, so to speak. All right, so how do you actually prep for these interviews? Now, mind you, this is not an exhaustive list. There's a lot of other resources out there, but these are the most common ones that I've compiled for a good chunk of the internships and a good chunk of the research. And I'll go through them one by one. So breaking into Wall Street, it's a service that provides guides and resources for interviews in investment banking, but they've recently branched out and have done interview prep for a variety of other career paths, such as sales and trading, private equity. Some of their resources can be found online. So if you, for example, Google Break into Wall Street 400 question guide, that should be public. And some of their public resources will be out there as well. So you don't need to really pay for their services. A good chunk of it is out there floating in the internet, and you can probably find it. Sell-Side Handbook, I think, is a bit of a hidden gem. It provides a lot of in-depth guides, resources, and news to cover varieties of career and finance, not just investment banking, but sales and trading, private equity, venture capital, equity capital markets, and debt capital markets, just everything that's going on in the capital markets in general. They have very helpful articles to help you learn new concepts. If you're breaking into a new industry, learn about what that industry does. And they're based in Canada. So a lot of their interview questions and their advice, it's all based around Canadian and Toronto recruiting specifically. So it's very applicable to us. Wall Street Oasis is you can think of it as like the Reddit of finance. It's a forum where people can ask questions, and it's very useful for a few key things. Number one, you can search up the firm you're going to be interviewing at, and you can find past insights. How hard was the interview? What kind of questions they asked? These are all pieces of intelligence that will greatly help you in your interview prep. You can also ask other people. You can follow up on how the process is going. So there's usually going to be threads on like, Morgan Stanley investment banking recruiting 2022, and there's going to be a lot of people posting information about what's been going on. And so keeping yourself in touch with everything that's been going on, and using Wall Street Oasis as a crowdsourced tool to see what kind of questions to expect, that's where it really shines. CFI is useful. They have a lot of different videos and tutorials and articles on financial modeling, different asset classes, etc. Some of their stuff is behind a paywall, but they do have a lot of free content, so make sure to take advantage of it. If you're going to be part of the capital markets training program, or if you already are, then you know that they're partnering with CFI to provide their services. Investopedia, great way to learn about different aspects of the capital markets. It doesn't really go specifically into interview prep, but it does help you maybe hammer on some concepts that you might be lacking in before your interview. But the number one way to really succeed at your interview is doing mock interviews with other people. This could be fellow classmates who are also recruiting with you, older students who have already recruited for these roles, or people that are currently working who are willing to spare a few minutes to interview you. This is by far the best way to interview. Why? Because these people are going to ask questions that are relevant. They'll give you direct feedback on where you need to improve and where you're doing well. And they will generally make you feel more confident, because the more mocks you do and the better you get at them, you're going to go into that interview not feeling like you're not feeling as nervous and as panicked as you otherwise would be. So I would definitely recommend mocking. I know Davis, Piero, and I mocked so many times before interviews, and it really helped when it came to performing well in the interview section. And yeah, I think that concludes our presentation. So I think we will open the floor to Q&A.
Yeah. First thing I'm going to say, just before we start, I know we are just a bit time over 8 p.m. So for those who really need to leave, thank you so much for coming out, and like thank you for being with us. And for those who want to stay and get some Q&A or listen to the common questions other people have, we'll now actually turn off the recording for, like privacy and stuff like that. Piero.